In the frozen outskirts of Montana, a former Marine walked into an orphanage just to lend a helping hand. But what he discovered inside those worn-out walls would change the course of his life. A fading journal hidden in the director's old desk, a list of children she rescued from cruelty, and a final note begging him to protect the only family she had left. With his loyal German shepherd by his side, Jack is thrust into a mission he never trained for. Not a battlefield, but a house filled with broken hearts needing a champion. And when the director collapses in the storm and whispers, "They only have you," Jack realizes this isn't chance. It's calling. If you believe God still places the right people in the right places at the right time, don't scroll away. Hit subscribe, share, and comment Amen to help spread this story of hope, faith, and redemption. May the Lord bless and protect everyone watching this. The early winter in northern Montana arrived with a quiet, merciless beauty. The sky stretched wide and pale, washed in a steel-gray tone that signaled the long months of cold ahead. A thin layer of fresh snow covered the tops of pine trees, and icy wind slid across the open fields surrounding the small town of Willow Creek. A place so silent that even passing trucks sounded like distant echoes. The streets were lined with old wooden houses, their roofs dusted with frost, and the chimneys exhaled thin trails of smoke into the crisp morning air. Life here moved slowly, shaped by harsh winters and strong-willed people who had learned to live with nature's severity rather than fight against it. Into this rugged landscape returned Jack Carter, a 38-year-old former Marine whose broad shoulders and weathered features made him look like he belonged in this unforgiving land. Jack stood at 6'1", with a lean but muscular build, sculpted by years of military training. His jawline was sharply defined, his cheekbones high, and a faint scar ran along the right side of his face, an old reminder from a night raid overseas. His dark brown hair was trimmed short in the disciplined style he never abandoned, and a few strands of premature gray marked the stress of the life he had lived. His eyes, a cool shade of blue, often seemed distant, as if they were still searching for something the war had taken away. Beside him walked Rex, his loyal German shepherd, 4 years old, with a strong, athletic frame, sable-colored fur, and intelligent amber eyes that scanned everything around them. Rex had served with Jack during his last deployment as a trained K9 search dog, and although now retired, he moved with the same alert confidence of an animal always ready to protect his partner. The bond between the two was unmistakable. They walked in sync, as though sharing the same heartbeat. Jack had returned to Willow Creek not because it was home, but because it was quiet. He needed space to breathe, space to understand who he was without a uniform. The war had left a silent heaviness inside him, a hollow that was too easy to ignore when surrounded by chaos, but impossible to escape in peace. After weeks of drifting from one odd job to another, he found himself standing in front of a modest sign that read, "Hope Meadow Orphanage." The building itself was old but tidy, a 2-story wooden structure with a slanted roof and peeling white paint, sitting at the edge of a pine forest. A small playground with rusted swings stood to one side, half buried in snow. Jack hesitated at the entrance gate, the cold wind biting his face, before pushing it open and stepping inside with Rex close at his heel. As he approached the front door, it swung open, and Ms. Eleanor Brooks, the orphanage director, stepped out to greet him. She was a woman in her mid-60s, thin and small-framed with silver hair tied neatly into a low bun. Deep wrinkles traced her gentle face, yet her Green eyes remained sharp and warm, reflecting years of caring for children with very little help. She wore a thick wool cardigan over a faded blue dress, and her movements had the careful slowness of someone whose health no longer matched her determination. Despite her frailty, there was a firmness in her posture that suggested an unyielding heart. "You must be Mr. Carter," she said, her voice raspy but kind. "And this is your partner, I suppose." Jack nodded. "Yes, ma'am, this is Rex. We heard that you were looking for volunteers." Ms. Brooks studied him thoughtfully, her gaze lingering on the lines of exhaustion around his eyes. "We always need help," she replied softly. "Come in, both of you." Inside, the orphanage felt colder than the outside air, not because of temperature, but because of the weight of silence. The hallways were dimly lit, the floorboards old and creaking with every step. Children's drawings, faded, some torn, decorated the walls, showing houses, stick-figure families, and animals under sunny skies. Jack could sense the contrast between the hopeful images and the reality the children must have lived through. The first child he saw was Lily, a small 8-year-old girl with long chestnut hair and pale skin. She sat on the floor near the hallway corner, hugging a threadbare, stuffed rabbit. Lily's blue eyes followed Jack cautiously, but she did not speak. Her shoulders were slightly hunched inward, the posture of a child who had learned to make herself small to avoid harm. Ms. Brooks whispered that Lily had been abandoned at a gas station 2 years earlier and had struggled to trust adults ever since. Farther inside, Jack encountered Ben, a 10-year-old boy with curly black hair, freckled cheeks, and a thin frame that spoke of years lacking proper care. Unlike Lily, Ben approached with innocent curiosity, his brown eyes sparkling. "Is he your dog?" Ben asked, pointing at Rex. Rex wagged his tail once, sitting politely. Ben grinned wide, revealing a chipped front tooth. Despite his friendliness, Jack sensed a lingering sadness behind the boy's bright demeanor, one shaped by the loss of his mother and the disappearance of his father. Not long after, Jacob, a 14-year-old boy, stepped out from a doorway. Tall for his age, with a lanky build, messy, sandy blonde hair, and dark circles under his eyes, Jacob had the hardened expression of someone forced to grow up too soon. His quiet resentment was obvious in the clenched set of his jaw and the guarded look he gave Jack. Ms. Brooks mentioned softly that Jacob had survived a violent home environment, and though safe now, he still carried the scars of fear and mistrust. As Jack walked through the orphanage, meeting child after child, the worn walls and tired faces began to stir old memories in him. Memories of nights he spent alone as a boy. Memories of hunger, cold, and the feeling of being unwanted. He had rarely spoken of his past, to anyone. But here, in this place filled with wounded hearts, he felt an unexpected pull, as if he understood these children better than he wanted to admit. Ms. Brooks led him to a small office where she explained the orphanage's struggles: lack of funds, lack of staff, and too many children needing help. She apologized for the disorder, but Jack only shook his head, thinking of how much worse their lives could be without even this fragile shelter. Rex lay beside him, head resting on his paws, watching everything with quiet vigilance. When the tour ended, Jack stepped outside again. The sky was beginning to darken, and snowflakes drifted softly around him. He took a deep breath, feeling the cold air fill his lungs. He had come here expecting to stay only a day or two, maybe help fix a few things before moving on. But now, looking at the orphanage, he felt something awaken inside him, a sense of purpose he thought he had lost forever. Rex nudged his hand gently, as if sensing his thoughts. Jack looked down at his partner, then back at the building where the children waited, each with a story more painful than the last. "I guess we're staying a little longer," he murmured. And for the first time in months, he felt it. Something quiet, something warm. Hope. Over the next few days, the quiet rhythm of Hope Meadow slowly began to reveal itself to Jack. In the early mornings, frost coated the narrow windows, tracing delicate white lines across the glass, and the hallways filled with the soft footsteps of children waking to another uncertain day. Jack moved through the orphanage with Rex at his side, observing the fragile routines that held the place together. Though he had seen war, nothing had prepared him for the silent wounds carried by the children here. Ben was the first to open up to Jack. One afternoon, while Jack was fixing a loose wooden panel near the back porch, Ben approached him with hesitant steps. The boy's thin frame trembled slightly beneath his oversized sweater, and his curly black hair was wild from running outside. He sat down beside Jack, legs dangling off the edge, and after a few moments of silence, he began to speak. His voice was soft and uneven as he described how his mother, a gentle woman with warm brown skin and a laugh he could barely remember, had died from a long illness. His father, unable to cope with grief, had walked out on him shortly after. As Ben talked, Jack felt a tightness in his chest, recognizing the hopelessness in the boy's eyes, a feeling he knew far too well from his own childhood. Lily was harder to reach. She often hid in corners or behind furniture, her slender figure barely visible behind her long chestnut hair. Whenever Jack approached, she lowered her gaze, clutching her worn stuffed rabbit as if it were a shield. Jack learned from Ms. Brooks that Lily had been abandoned at a gas station on a freezing night, dressed in clothes too thin for winter. Since then, she had avoided physical contact, even flinching when someone spoke too loudly. Jack knelt beside her one morning, speaking in a gentle tone and letting Rex walk closer. The German shepherd lowered his head slowly, his amber eyes soft. Lily hesitated, but finally stretched out her hand, brushing his fur with trembling fingers. It was the first moment of trust Jack had seen from her. Jacob, the oldest, watched everything from a distance. The 14-year-old boy stood tall but carried himself with a hardened air. His sandy blonde hair fell over his forehead, and his light brown eyes held a guarded sharpness. Jacob rarely smiled, seldom spoke, and kept his hands shoved deep in his pockets as if protecting himself from unseen threats. When Ms. Brooks explained that Jacob had survived years of domestic violence before arriving at Hope Meadow, Jack understood the boy's stiffness, the way he seemed ready to flinch at any sudden movement. Yet beneath that defensive shell, he saw resilience, a spark of strength waiting for the right guidance. As Jack spent more time with the children, a realization weighed heavily on him. They didn't just need food and shelter. They needed structure, purpose, and someone who believed in them, things he himself had longed for when he was young. Jack found himself lying awake at night on the small cot Ms. Brooks had given him, thinking about how much these children deserved more than the scraps life had thrown at them. Finally, one evening after dinner, Jack knocked on the door of Ms. Brooks' modest office. The room was cluttered with old books, stacks of paperwork, and a fading photograph of her younger self standing beside a group of smiling children. Ms. Brooks sat behind a worn desk, her silver hair tied neatly, though she looked more tired than usual. Her thin hands trembled slightly as she folded a set of documents. "Ms. Brooks," Jack began, his voice firm but respectful, "I'd like to help more. not just fixing things or watching over them. I want to teach the younger ones how to read, maybe help the older kids learn some basic skills. Woodworking, simple repairs, anything that can help them stand on their own someday. Ms. Brooks's eyes widened with relief and gratitude. For years, she had managed Hope Meadow almost entirely alone, pushing herself past her limits because she believed no one else would step in. Seeing Jack standing before her, strong, steady, and sincere, felt like a blessing she had quietly prayed for. "Jack," she said softly, her voice trembling with emotion. "I've hoped for someone like you for a long time." Rex, sitting loyally by the door, lifted his head as Jack smiled for the first time in days. The heaviness inside him lightened as Ms. Brooks nodded encouragingly. The next morning, Jack entered the common room carrying a basket of old books he had found in storage. The children gathered around him, their expressions ranging from curiosity to skepticism. He cleared a small table, set the books down, and gestured for them to sit. With Rex lying at his feet like a watchful guardian, Jack introduced the idea of daily reading lessons. He kept his voice warm but steady, blending discipline with kindness. At first, the children were restless. Ben fidgeted excitedly. Lily hid half behind her chair, and Jacob stood leaning against the wall with crossed arms, pretending not to care. But slowly, as Jack read aloud, his deep, calm voice filling the room, their expressions softened. They leaned closer, drawn in by the rhythm of his words. For the first time in a long time, the orphanage felt alive, as if hope had quietly stepped through the front door and made itself at home. Jack watched them closely. Each child carried their own storm, their own darkness, but he saw something else too. Potential. The potential to grow, to heal, and to become more than the pain that had shaped them. And that realization, more than anything, broke open a part of Jack he thought had died long ago. He had come here searching for purpose, but the truth was clear now. The purpose had found him. The morning sun in Willow Creek was thin and pale, barely warming the frozen ground outside Hope Meadow. Jack stood in the main room of the orphanage, arranging a set of old books across a long wooden table. The room still smelled faintly of dust and worn paper, but something had begun to shift. An energy, a sense of possibility. Rex sat beside him, tail flicking slowly in anticipation, as if he already understood the important role he was about to play. Jack had spent most of the previous night planning lessons, drawing from memories of military training where discipline and patience were essential. But here, his mission was different. Not to shape soldiers, but to heal children. When the kids entered the room, some shuffled sleepily. Others watched him with cautious curiosity. Ben rushed in energetically, nearly tripping over a misplaced chair. Lily crept in small steps, her long hair falling like a curtain that shielded half her face. Jacob took his usual place leaning against the wall, arms crossed, pretending to be uninterested, though his eyes tracked everything. "Good morning," Jack said, his voice calm but confident. "Today we start something new." He opened a book and began with the alphabet, his tone soft but firm, guiding the younger children through each letter. Lily hesitated at first, whispering instead of speaking out loud, but Rex quietly lay next to her chair, his warm presence grounding her. When her voice cracked in shyness, Rex nudged her hand gently with his nose. Lily smiled for the first time that morning, a fleeting but precious moment. Ben, full of restless energy, answered every question too quickly, often wrong but eager. Jack encouraged him without scolding, redirecting his enthusiasm into helping Lily sound out words. Ben took the task seriously, leaning over her book with exaggerated care. The sight made Jack's chest warm with pride. Leadership in the making. Toward the back, Jacob remained aloof. Jack understood the boy's resistance. After years of chaos, structure sometimes felt threatening. So Jack involved him in a different way. "Jacob," he said, holding up a thick, worn-out novel. "Think you can read a page of this out loud? You've got the strongest voice in the room." Jacob narrowed his eyes but stepped forward, taking the book with careful hands. His voice was rough at first, but as he read, it smoothed out. The younger children turned to listen, their expressions softening with admiration. Jacob stopped after a minute, embarrassed by the attention, but Jack clapped once, firm and approving. "Good. Very good." The walls of Hope Meadow, once quiet, heavy, and tired, seemed to breathe with new life. By midday, Jack transitioned to the afternoon lessons for the older kids. The sun had risen higher, casting long beams of light across the yard. Jack led Jacob and a few other teenagers to a small workshop behind the orphanage. The workshop was old, filled with rusty tools, crooked shelves, and half-broken furniture. He saw potential in every piece. "We're fixing this place up," Jack said, handing Jacob a pair of worn work gloves. "Starting with that table." Jacob hesitated, but once he held the tools in his hands, something changed. He handled them with surprising skill, steady, precise. Jack recognized the focus in the boy's eyes, the seriousness, perhaps a way to silence memories he'd rather not speak about. Working gave him purpose. A new boy joined them that afternoon. Tommy Jenkins, 12 years old, newly arrived from a neighboring county. Tommy had messy, light brown hair, olive-toned skin, and a small scar above his eyebrow. His expression was timid but hopeful. Ms. Brooks introduced him briefly. He had been living on the streets with his older sister until social workers brought him here. Jack noticed the boy's nervous habit of tapping his fingers against his leg, a sign of lingering anxiety. Wanting him to feel included, Jack assigned him a simple task: sorting nails by size. Tommy nodded quickly, grateful not to be overlooked. Later, Jack taught the kids how to change a bicycle tire. Rex stayed nearby, occasionally placing a paw on a fallen tool as if trying to assist, which made everyone laugh. Even Jacob cracked a small smile when Rex tried to carry a wrench in his mouth. As the hours passed, the sounds of children laughing, tools clinking, and books flipping filled the orphanage, sounds that had been missing for far too long. Ms. Brooks watched from a distance, her thin hands clasped tightly over her heart. She stood in the doorway of the common room, her gentle green eyes glistening. Her old-fashioned dress, knitted shawl, and slightly stooped posture made her look fragile, but inside she carried a fierce hope. Watching Jack move with calm assurance, encouraging each child with patience and warmth, she saw what she had long suspected. He was changing the orphanage in ways she never could alone. The children gravitated toward him, trusting him without hesitation. He became not only their teacher, but their anchor. As evening settled, Jack cleaned the classroom while the children prepared for dinner. The sky outside glowed with a soft orange light, touching the snow-covered ground with surprising warmth. Rex curled at Jack's feet, tail thumping lazily. Jack looked around the room, the books neatly stacked, the children whispering excitedly about tomorrow's lessons, and felt something shift deep within him. He hadn't planned to stay. He hadn't planned to care this much. But these children, each carrying a story of loss and pain, had begun to fill the empty spaces inside him. Hope Meadow was no longer just a place he helped. It was quietly becoming home. The night settled heavily over Willow Creek, as a thick veil of snow drifted down from a starless sky. The winds were quiet, but cold enough to sting the skin, and the pine trees surrounding Hope Meadow swayed gently, their branches collecting frost like fragile silver. Inside the orphanage, warmth from the old furnace crept through the hallways, leaving a faint scent of burning wood. Most of the children were already asleep, exhausted after a long day of lessons and laughter. Jack lingered in the common room, cleaning up the last of the books from the afternoon class while Rex dozed near the fireplace, his sable fur glowing softly in the flickering light. Just as Jack placed the final book on the shelf, he heard soft footsteps behind him. Turning, he saw Ms. Eleanor Brooks standing by the hallway entrance. Her thin frame looked even smaller beneath her thick wool shawl, and her silver hair was slightly messy, as if she'd run her hand through it repeatedly. Her green eyes, normally warm, were shadowed with fatigue. "Jack," she said, her voice delicate yet carrying an unmistakable resolve. "May I speak with you in my office?" Jack sensed something serious in her tone. He followed her down the hallway into her office, a dimly lit room lined with old photographs, children's drawings, and stacks of paperwork. A small lamp glowed on her cluttered desk, casting long shadows across the walls. Ms. Brooks eased herself into her worn chair, her movements slow, revealing the exhaustion she tried so hard to hide. "Please sit," she said softly. Jack sat opposite her, his broad shoulders straightening, sensing an important conversation ahead. Rex lay at his feet, ears perked and alert. Ms. Brooks folded her hands, the wrinkles on her knuckles stark under the lamp. "Jack," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "I need to be honest with you about something I've kept to myself for too long." She paused, gathering strength. "My health. It has been declining much faster than I expected." Jack stiffened. "Ma'am, is it serious?" She offered a tired, sad smile. "More serious than I've let on. I've been trying to manage everything here. The children, the finances, the repairs. But I'm reaching my limit." Her gaze softened as she looked at him, the light reflecting in her eyes like a final plea. "Jack, you've done more for this place in a few weeks than I've managed in years. The children trust you. They look up to you." Jack felt a knot forming in his chest. He already knew where this was going, but he wasn't ready for it. Ms. Brooks continued, her voice more fragile than he had ever heard. "I want you to take over Hope Meadow." The words hit him harder than any battlefield explosion. He inhaled sharply, leaning back as if pushed by the weight of the request. "Ms. Brooks, I can't do that." "Why not?" she asked gently. Jack stood, pacing once toward the window before facing her again. The lamplight cast sharp angles across his rugged face, highlighting the faint scar that ran along his jaw. "Because I'm not someone who runs a home. I was trained to survive, to fight, to protect, not to raise children, manage paperwork, or lead an entire place. I don't know how to be responsible for so many lives." His voice faltered. "I'm not a father. I never had one myself. How could I possibly become one for them?" Ms. Brooks watched him with compassion. "Jack, you don't have to be perfect. You just have to care. And you do. The way you look at them, teach them, guide them, it's more than enough." But Jack shook his head, the turmoil inside him growing. "No. They deserve better. Someone stable, someone who isn't broken." For a long moment the room was silent except for the faint hum of the furnace. Ms. Brooks bowed her head slightly. "I understand," she whispered. "I won't force you. I only thought—" Her voice cracked softly. I only thought that maybe fate brought you here for a reason. Feeling overwhelmed, Jack gently excused himself and stepped into the hallway. The lights were dim, and the air felt colder, as if the orphanage itself sensed the weight of the conversation. Rex followed quietly, his steps light, sensing Jack's inner struggle. As Jack walked past the sleeping quarters, he paused near the doorway of the younger children's room. The faint sound of breathing drifted through the air, small and steady. He took a step inside. Moonlight filtered through the frosted windows, bathing the beds in a bluish glow. Ben lay curled beneath a worn blanket, his curly hair scattered chaotically across his pillow. Jack was about to turn away when Ben suddenly murmured in his sleep, his voice weak and trembling. Uncle Jack, don't leave us. Please. Jack froze. The whisper pierced straight through him, deeper than any wound he had endured in war. It wasn't a plea from a soldier or a command from a superior. It was the fragile hope of a child who had found someone to believe in. He stood there for a long time, his chest rising and falling as quiet realization settled heavily inside him. He had tried to resist responsibility, afraid he wasn't enough. But the truth unfolded in that moment. These children didn't need perfection. They needed presence. They needed someone who would fight for them, stay with them, and refuse to give up on them. And maybe, just maybe, Jack needed them just as much. 1 week passed, and winter in Willow Creek grew harsher. Snow fell relentlessly, swallowing the roads in thick white blankets. The children at Hope Meadow moved more quietly than usual, sensing the tension that lingered in the air. Jack tried to mask his worry, but something in Ms. Brooks's tired eyes during the past few days had unsettled him deeply. She had insisted she was fine, just overworked, just cold. But Jack knew the look of someone pushing past their limits. He had seen it too many times on the battlefield. It happened on a frigid morning. Jack was leading the older kids in the workshop when a small figure burst through the door. It was Tommy Jenkins, cheeks flushed red from running, his breath forming frantic clouds in the icy air. "Jack!" he cried, voice trembling. "Ms. Brooks, she fell!" Jack dropped the wrench in his hand. Without a word, he sprinted out of the workshop with Rex racing beside him. Inside the main hallway, he found Ms. Brooks collapsed on the floor, her frail body lying against the wall. Her skin was pale, her lips slightly blue. Jack knelt beside her, lifting her gently. Her pulse was weak. "We need to get her to the hospital," Jack said, voice steady despite the fear clawing inside him. Mr. Harold Mendez, a middle-aged neighbor who sometimes brought food donations, rushed forward to help. Harold was a thick-set man in his early 50s, with salt and pepper stubble and calloused hands from years working as a mechanic. He was known around town as quiet but dependable, a man who rarely smiled but always showed up when needed. The death of his wife a decade earlier had made him reserved, yet moments like this revealed his true heart. "My truck's outside," Harold said gruffly. "Let's go." They carried Ms. Brooks through the blowing snow and placed her in the truck. Jack climbed into the back seat, holding her upright as Harold sped toward the county hospital. Rex whimpered softly from the passenger side, restless and worried. At the hospital, nurses rushed Ms. Brooks into the emergency wing. Jack paced in the waiting room, fists clenched, heart pounding. The sterile white walls and cold fluorescent lights reminded him of field hospitals overseas, places where hope dangled by a thread. Harold sat nearby, arms crossed, watching Jack with quiet sympathy. An hour passed, Then a doctor approached, a woman named Dr. Melissa Harrington, tall and slender with chestnut hair tied in a tight bun. She had sharp hazel eyes that conveyed competence, framed by soft lines that came from years of long shifts. Her posture was straight, professional, yet her voice carried warmth. She collapsed from severe exhaustion and malnutrition, Dr. Harrington explained. Her body has been under immense stress for years. She's going into emergency surgery. She asked to see you before we proceed. Jack swallowed hard and followed the doctor to the pre-op room. Ms. Brooks lay on the bed, surrounded by machines that beeped steadily. Her skin looked almost translucent under the harsh lights. When Jack approached, she reached out with trembling fingers. Jack. Her voice was barely audible, but filled with a lifetime of love and worry. He grasped her frail hand. "I'm here, Ms. Brooks." She blinked slowly, pain flickering across her aging features. "The children. They have no one else," she whispered. "They trust you. They need you." Her voice quivered. "You're the one God sent to them, and you're the one He sent to me." Jack felt his throat tighten. "You'll be okay," he said, though his voice cracked with doubt. "No," she whispered, gripping his hand with surprising strength. "Listen to me, Jack. Whatever happens tonight, promise me you'll stay with them. Promise me you'll keep Hope Meadow alive." Her plea pierced everything inside him. Fear, doubt, the belief that he wasn't enough. In that moment, Jack understood that some responsibilities were not chosen. They were placed upon a person by a force greater than themselves, and some promises were meant to change a life. "I promise," he whispered. Ms. Brooks's eyes softened. A faint smile tugged at her lips before the nurses gently pushed the bed toward the operating room. Jack watched her disappear behind the closing doors, feeling something within him shift, an acceptance he had resisted for too long. The surgery lasted hours. Jack remained in the waiting area with Rex curled at his feet and Harold sitting silently nearby. Snow continued to fall outside, covering the town in a quiet blanket, as if the world itself was holding its breath. By dawn, Ms. Brooks was stable. Jack walked outside, letting the cold morning air hit his face. He looked toward the horizon, where the first light of day painted the sky in shades of gold. He realized then, he hadn't been brought to Hope Meadow by accident. This place, these children, this mission, it was all a path he was meant to walk. When Jack returned to the orphanage later that morning, the moment he stepped through the door, the children rushed toward him. Ben hugged his waist tightly. Lily clung to his sleeve. Jacob stood at the back, trying and failing to hide his relief. Rex barked joyfully, circling them. Jack knelt down, placing a hand on each child's shoulder. "I'm not leaving," he said softly. "I'm here for all of you. And I'm staying." Cheers, tears, and laughter filled the room. In the warm glow of the hearth, surrounded by fragile hearts that finally felt safe, Jack felt a peace he had searched for his entire life. Hope Meadow was no longer just a shelter. It was home, and he was finally ready to become the guardian it needed. In the end, Jack didn't find a miracle. The miracle found him. Sometimes God doesn't speak through thunder or bright lights. Sometimes He whispers through the smallest voices, through the laughter of a child who finally feels safe, through the loyalty of a dog who never leaves your side, through the quiet courage of a man who chooses love over fear. Hope Meadow became more than a home because Jack listened to that whisper and answered it. And maybe that is the message for all of us. Miracles don't always appear as big, shining moments. Sometimes they look like everyday kindness, a hand reaching out, a heart opening, or a promise kept when no one else would. In a world full of noise, God is still working. In the quiet, in the hidden places, in the hearts that choose compassion, even when life has been unkind. If this story touched your heart, I invite you to share it so others may feel a little hope today. Leave a comment about the moments in your life when God sent you a small miracle. And if you'd like more stories of healing and faith, please subscribe to the channel to walk this journey with us. May God bless you, protect your family, and bring light into every corner of your life. Amen.